Welcome to the Restorative Longevity Podcast, where we share how to increase your quality of life while also increasing your longevity. Yes, you heard that right. We refuse to believe that as we get older, our quality of life naturally declines. And that's exactly what you're going to hear on this podcast. How to defy the odds with simple, effective strategies that anyone can implement into their daily routine. From holistic health practices to time-tested wisdom, we're here to help you thrive, not just survive. Now let's welcome our host, Jimmy Yen, also known as the Acu Sensei. Jimmy is a licensed acupuncturist, herbalist, nutritionist, and restorative longevity expert dedicated to guiding you on your journey to vibrant health and lasting wellness.
And so today we're going to talk about, hey, does my brain really need fat? There's very conflicting information. And so just like any nutrition, any diet type of research, you're going to get different opinions and you're going to get different researches, right? And so people are going to argue, oh, so-and-so research debunks what you just said. And, so wherever you're trying to say, hey, I saw so-and-so, Dr. So-and-so told me, this doctor told me to eat this specific thing, but someone else can show research that says that doctor is incorrect. So, I'm just going to present new research that had even more complication and more confusion, right? So today's podcast is, does my brain really need more fat? Does my brain really need fat? If you Google this question, you're going to find a lot of articles, a lot of research saying that your brain needs fat. And in alignment with how I do this podcast, I'm going to tell you the point of this podcast and the answer of this podcast. Your brain does not need more fat. That's a generalized statement. I'm going to give you some specifics, but I just want to get your attention. Your brain does not need you to eat more fat. Okay? That is the point. Now, is there specific fat that you need to eat? Yes, but it's not as much as what the culture is saying, what society is saying, that you need to eat a lot more fat. And especially recently, the ketogenic diet has been so popular. It's like, eat more fat and you'll feel better, blah, 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 blah. And I'm not saying those people did not feel better temporarily, but long term, they're not better. Their organs are destroyed, right? Their brain they're destroying their brain. They're adding more fat to their organs, visceral fats. So that is the point of today's podcast, is you don't need to eat more fat, despite what the current research says, right? But let me give you some data. And before I do that, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you get more of these different views of nutrition. I'm not going to say they're better. I'm not going to say they're accurate, because it could be debunked in next year, right? But the data that I present to you, the facts I present to you, they are based off reality-based research. Reality-based research means they have lasted for at least over 100 years, and they're still in effect. So that is the research. So are they going to be debunked? Is the data that I'm going to give you be debunked next year? I'm pretty sure some scientists are going to try to debunk it, but you need to choose. Do you want to believe what research says, or do you want to believe the research that is done in a lab, or research that's just done by people sitting on a computer and looking at data and analyzing the data? Or do you want to follow research that has been done on people observing communities, not just one or two people, but communities of people that are living longer lives, restorative longevity lives. They are living longer lives and they're living a higher quality life. So these are actual people alive doing it. They've done it for over 100 years, right? So let's get to the skinny of it. So your brain does not need more fat. If you have a question, you have a comment, you can feel free to type into the chat. I'm always, if you got questions, if I got time, I want to answer the questions. So does your brain need more fat? Let's start with the structural part of your brain, right? How much fat is actually in your brain? Because here's the myth that people are using. They're saying that because your brain is over 60% fat, contains fat, that's why you need to eat more fat, right? And that makes common sense, right? If your brain is truly 60% of fat, then you would assume 1 plus 1 equals 2, and you would assume that you should be eating more fat. And so let's talk about that specific data, right? So, I'm not sure how those pieces of data came to be, in the sense of how they found out that the brain is over 60% of fat. So let me give you some other pieces of data. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just giving you other pieces of data from researchers and scientists that actually weighed your brain. So when you weighed your brain, here's the overall answer. Your brain is really only about 11% fat. Only about 11%. The weight of your brain, only 11% of that is fat. Now, there's different ways that you can weigh your brain, and that can change that data. So, for example, if you are weighing the brain and you include water, because brain contains a lot of water, and we've talked about this in a previous podcast. So, if you are weighing your brain with water, including water, then fat makes up only 11% of the brain composition. So with water, there's only 11% fat of your brain. Okay. Now, if you take out the water, you exclude water, and you take out the water, then your brain makes up a little less than 50% of your brain's weight. And that's probably where people are getting the 60%. But still, over 60% versus under 50%, that's still a big discrepancy. It's a big difference, right? And so maybe go to a cadaver lab. Cadaver labs are, they have dead bodies, right? And go weigh, and actually you go yourself weigh the brain. So I would not fight for either side until I personally have gone and weighed a brain myself. I have not personally weighed a brain. So I'm just giving you more data to maybe confuse you even more. But this is the most recent data, okay? Most recent research from scientists. They are saying that our brain only contains about 11% fat. And if you include water. If you exclude water, it's less than 50%. So still a substantial. The point is, the brain still has a lot of fat, right? And here's the thing, because people have believed, one person says it's over 60%, so now everybody thinks it's 60%. But the point is, the brain does contain a lot of fat, right? So you would think, okay, I need to eat more fat. My brain has a lot of fat, so it's made of fat, so I need to eat more fat, right? But here's the thing, that's what doctors believe, but scientists believe the opposite. You don't need to eat more fat. In fact, you need to eat less fat, right? Less fat. And why is this? Why are there so much discrepancy, so much confusion in nutrition and diet? And it's because several decades ago, if you remember, they were promoting a low-fat, high-carb diet here in the US, right? They were saying, researchers were saying, physicians were saying, the medical associations were saying, hey, you need to eat a low-fat, high-carb diet. This will prevent cardiovascular diseases, right? And it will prevent, so then they were just saying, if you want to be healthy, you don't eat fat and you eat carbs. Now why is that? Why was the American Medical Association researchers all promoting that specific diet at that time? Well, later now, 50 years later, they found out that the sugar industry paid off. Sugar industry paid off media. Sugar industry paid off Harvard researchers. So this goes back to who's paying for the research. So sugar industry paid for probably politicians. I'm not knowing about politicians, but there was an article that said that they did pay off. The sugar industry did pay off Harvard scientists and researchers, right? So that was back then. And once that was exposed, then now there's new research. Because in June in 2014, Time magazine did an article that stated ending the war on fat. So now new researchers were debunking old research. This is the reason why I said research is good, but you should not stake your life on research, because depending on who pays for it, most of the research is giving you incorrect data. Right? It's giving you data that's going to benefit whoever paid for the research. So in 2014, they debunked the low-fat diet. They were saying no. They were saying, the sugar industry paid for that, the scientists to say low-fat diets and high carbohydrate diets were good for you. Now, who's paying for this fat diet, right? You got to think about that. Possibly the dairy industry, right? And so now, in June of 2014, another people paid off Time Magazine to write a story that says ending the war on fat. They're saying, no, now you need more fat because our brain contains fat and you need to eat more fat. And high carb diets were actually causing weight gain, which is true. That wasn't wrong, right? And so after 2014, now Americans are eating more fat. Butter sales in the US went up in 2015. So the article came out in 2014, and now the sale of butter, it's from dairy, right, went up in the next year, 2015. In fact, whole milk sales went up by 11%. Skim milk is low-fat milk, dropped. The sales dropped by 14%. And everybody is starting to ditch carbs for fats, right? So who paid for that research, right? But my point is showing is that all of this research it's important, but you need to really have a skeptical eye and really find out before you really look at the research and believe in the research, look at who's paying for the research, right? Because now recent research shows that the high carb diets back then that the sugar industry paid for promotes weight gain. And that is true. If you eat a lot of sugar, you eat a lot of donuts, guess what? You're going to gain a lot of weight, right? High fat diets also are going to cause, right? They found out eating cholesterol or high fat diets only had a modest influence on the level of cholesterol in the blood, and therefore a lower impact on the risk of heart disease than previously thought. Now they're talking about healthy fats, right? They're saying if you eat healthy fats, it's going to be good for your blood vessels, right? And now new research are saying that no, it doesn't. Right? It doesn't reduce your risk of heart disease that much. So again, research are being paid for. So what is the truth? Those are the myths. What's the truth? The truth is fat isn't just fat. Now there are different types of fat, right? Or another word for fat is the word lipids. You will hear people say lipids. All it means is just fats. And many times, researchers, even healthcare practitioners, they try to use these complicated words so that the lay person, the person who doesn't have the training, the background to understand those technical terms, they are mystified. They are like, oh, I need to do this, right? And that's why you will hear, and I'm not saying that what they're doing is wrong. I'm just saying my style is to keep the language as simple as possible. Because if you can't understand the language, right, then it's easy for people to deceive you. It's easy for people to tell you the myths. And it's also confusing. It's you, the lay person who's not trained in this, it's hard for you to understand what is false. That's just the same thing. Like if someone was teaching me, trying to share information about, let's say, astronomy, right? And they use these technical terms. And it's like over my head, right? Well, it's good for them. They may sound all knowledgeable and stuff, but I don't understand any of it. So it's just going to be more confusing to me, right? So that's not what I want to do. I want to keep things simple because I want you to understand. Because I don't want you to be dependent upon me to take care of your health. I want you to be dependent upon yourself so that you have the knowledge. And that's the purpose of this podcast, is to give you the knowledge in simple terminology where you can understand. So fats and lipids are the same thing. So when you hear someone say lipids, they're just meaning fat. Now there's different types of fat. Fat is not just fat, right? Now when we hear the word fat, we typically think of the words like cholesterol, which is a type of fat. But there's other types of fats that practitioners will just throw around, right? And so I'm going to help you simplify these so you can understand. So for example, phospholipids, sphingolipids, these are complex fats. They're still fats. They're just different types of fats. So what do you need to know when you hear the word phospholipids, sphingolipids, right? They're just different types of fats, bigger building blocks of fats, right? Here's another fact. These fats that you've probably never heard of, phospholipids, sphingolipids, right? These unknown or not well-known fats, they account for 70% of the fats found in your brain. So the fats that we don't hear about are 70% of the fats of our brain. So quite important, right? Not all fats make you fat. Some fats, if you eat dairy fat, that's going to make you fat, right? That's what they don't tell you in the article in 2014 when they said in Time magazine where they're saying ending the war on fat, and then next year butter sales went up, whole milk sales went up. Those things will make you fat. Those fats will make you fat, okay? Because they're the fats that we don't need, right? So your brain doesn't need those fats. So those fats that you're taking in, regardless of what research tells you, those fats go right into your abdomen. They give you right into your belly, your hips, your love handles. They make you fat in the abdomen, right? So here's a couple of more myths. Your brain needs fat for energy. No, it doesn't. And even though your brain contains a lot of fat, your brain actually lacks the ability to burn fat to produce energy for itself. Your brain cannot burn fat to produce energy. So when you're going on a keto diet, right, it ain't helping your brain. So it doesn't touch any of the fat that you are eating. Majority, there's exceptions. Now, I'm saying something's extreme for a reason to get your attention. Yes, there are a couple exceptions, but majority of the fat that you eat, your brain can't use, and it doesn't want it, right? So what are the different types of fat? I'm gonna break them to two main categories. There's storage fat, and then there's structural fat. The rest of the body can use fat for energy. Just your brain does not. So when you think that you're drinking whole milk, you're eating a lot of butter, you're eating a lot of animal fat, you think it's helping your brain, it's actually not. Your brain prevents that from going into your brain. Your brain doesn't use it, right? Now there's two types of fat, storage fat and structural fat. What's the difference, right? Storage fat, coming back to storage fat and structural fat, okay? Storage fat is exactly what it sounds like. It's for storage, right? It's for energy. That is for energy, right? This is the fat that most people are talking about. So when people are talking about fat, even practitioners, doesn't matter what type of holistic, natural physician, they're all talking about this type of fat. This type of fat, storage fat. What's another term for storage fat? Another term for storage fat is adipose fat or white fat. They're all the same thing. Adipose tissue, adipose fat, white fat, storage fat. That's what they're talking about, storage fat, right? So what does storage fat do? What's the function of it? Storage fat, we use this to store energy. We actually can break this fat down, right? Break this fat down to use for energy. This is what happens when you go on a low carb diet. You force your body to break down this storage fat, right? You force your body to break down the storage fat so that you can get that energy. That's why a low carb diet will temporarily help you lose weight. You notice temporarily, it doesn't help you lose weight permanently. Consistency, right? What does it feel like? Well, you want to know what the storage fat feels like? Just kind of on your belly and grab your love handles. That's what storage fat feels like, right? It's squishy, it's soft, and storage fat is visible. We can see it with our eyes. So when you have the little any type of fat on your triceps, a little jiggly, right? Those are storage fat. And on your belly where it jiggles, right? Those are storage fats. So those you can touch, right? Now, where does the storage fat come from, right? Large part, it comes from our diet. Most of the stuff we eat, storage fats, right? Most of the fats that we eat, they are meats, cheese, candy bars, processed sugar. Those all go to storage fat. Because those, from what we eat, the meats, the cheese, the dairy, they are broken down into smaller units called saturated fats. This process itself, breaking those fat down into saturated fats or simple units of fat, fatty acids, that's another term, fatty acids, lipids, fatty acids, same thing. This process generates heat and energy, right? Now these fats, they're broken down these little small fats. Like a big fat, like your animal protein, like your steak, you got that fat on your steak where you eat cheese, right? You drink some whole milk. That's like a big molecule of fat. It's broken down to this little tiny molecule of fat, right? Then your body takes those tiny molecules of fat and reassembles, it clumps them together to form triglycerides. Triglycerides are another fatty acid, they're another fats, right? You've heard of that because that's what your doctors do a blood test on, fatty acids. And that's what they're testing, fatty acids. If it's a rise of if you have a high triglycerides, that's the terrible thing, right? Because those fats are sticky. Those are what sticks in your blood vessels, right? Now, those triglycerides are then stored. They're stored in your adipose tissue. So remember, what is adipose tissue? Adipose tissue is white fat. It is storage fat. So triglycerides. So let's go back and break this down again. You eat your big steak with fat, or you drink a glass of milk, your body breaks that down into small molecules of fat. Then it takes those small molecules of fat, clumps them together to form triglycerides. And the triglycerides they're packed into your abdomen, your storage fats, right? Your fatty tissue, your adipose tissue. And they're storage there for future use for fuel. This makes storage fat the largest reservoir we possess as humans. So storage fat is our storage of energy. And you kind of think of it as a portable battery pack, right? So here's an example. A typical man, 160 pounds, right? That's actually about me. I'm 156 this morning, but roughly 160, right? I will carry about 27 pounds of adipose tissue, of storage fat. That is 100,000 calories worth of energy. So just carrying 27 pounds, I will have 100,000 calories worth of energy stored, right? 160 pound man, for those of y'all who use kilograms, is 70 kilograms. About 70 kilograms, you will carry 12 kilograms of fat, right? So that will give you 100,000 calories worth of energy. That is the reason why you don't need to eat more fat. All the cookies, bakes, the baked breads, right? All of those, you don't need more fats, guys. Here's the interesting fact. There is no storage fat in the brain. There is zero storage fat in the brain. This is why earlier I said the brain does not use fat for energy. Because it doesn't use fat for energy, it doesn't need a storage of fat, right? Second thing, so the first category, two main categories of fats. One is storage fat, the other is structural fat. So what is structural fat? Structural fat is not unlike storage fat. We don't use structural fat for energy. We use structural fat to maintain our structure. That's why it's called structural fat. The brain contains only structural fat. So when doctors are telling you, oh, you need to eat more animal protein, you need to drink more milk, you need to eat more cheese, drink more dairy products, it's going to help your Alzheimer's. No, it doesn't. It helps zero with your brain function because your brain does not contain storage fat, which all those foods go to storage fat. So can you see why you don't need fat, right? You don't need more fat. That's what I'm saying. Does your brain really need fat? It doesn't need storage fat. Now it needs structural fat. Now let's go through what structural fat is, right? But the brain contains only structural fat. The rest of the body contains both storage fat and structural fat, right? So structural fat, what does it do? Structural fat is you're not utilized for energy. It does not float around in your bloodstream and clog your arteries. Storage fat does. Triglycerides. Storage fat is sticky. That's why it clogs your arteries. So if you want to decrease, if you have cardiovascular problems, health history in your family history, you need to stop eating storage fats, okay? Now structural fat, come back to structural fats what's the function of structural fats? Our cells use structural fats like technical support. Structural fats, right, in our cells, they form the structure of our cells. Example, our brain cells are wrapped in a fatty sheath called myelin sheath. This myelin sheath, just like it looks like a hot dog bun, right? The structural fat wraps our nerve cells, our brain cells. It helps us conduct electricity. Why? Because our bodies communicate through electricity. So the more insulation we have, the faster our brain and our nerves can communicate. right? It provides a clear insulation for electrical impulses traveling to and from the brain. So if you have chronic degenerative disorders, if you have chronic pain, you have chronic autoimmune disorders, chances are you have a communication problem. And chances are there is damage to the insulation on your nerves and your brain cells, right? And so you do need to help your brain produce more structural fats. That's one thing. If there's anything you want to eat, it is to help. You need to eat more structural fat. You need to eat zero. This is a fact. Zero storage fat. You don't need to eat storage fat. Okay? As only storage fat only hurts you. It doesn't help you. Right? So whatever the cholesterol the brain contains is found mostly in this myelin sheath, which acts as an insulator. So here's another example. Neurons, nerve cells, right, also are enclosed in a delicate fatty membrane that not only protect them from external attacks, but they also allow signals and nutrients to flow in and out of the cell. Every single cell in your body needs this structural fat, and they need protection. It's kind of like when they put these little soft rubber around it to insulate electricity, right? And it also protects those copper wires, those electricity wires. If it didn't have that protection, we would not have electricity. I would not be able to do this podcast, right? So our nerves are very similar to like the copper wires or whatever they use now to conduct electricity. Copper wires, maybe some other fiber optic wires, but there's always a protective coating around them because that allows that electricity to flow faster. And that's exactly how our brain and our body works. Just imagine we are full of those copper wires and we need insulation, the protective wiring, right? It allows the message to go faster and it also protects those wires from getting damaged, right? It's the exact same thing. So these membranes are made of fats, structural fats. What are they? It's what we hear of omega-3s and phospholipids. So here's some things to kind of like common sense. If the brain had been made of burnable fat, combustible fat or burnable, let's say the brain was made of like storage fat that it can burn, right? Then it might start eating itself. It would start like every time it needs energy, it would just start eating itself, right? That's the reason why. So it's like common sense. That's why the brain doesn't contain storage fat. It only contains structural fats. Because if it contains storage fat, then it could start, if you starved it, it could start eating itself. Just imagine your brain eating yourself. Pretty soon you won't have a brain, right? So you would be wondering, okay, so what fats do I eat? Well, it's structural fats. And I kind of almost gave you the clue, right? Structural fats. We'll go into this in another podcast because this is just a fascinating topic, right? And so I just want to make sure that when you are eating, right, you want to pay attention to not to eat storage fats. Our body makes, and I'm going to go in another podcast of how our body makes storage fats. It makes more than enough storage fats than you will ever need, just from your normal diet. You don't need to be intentionally eating more storage fats. Right? Now you do need to eat more structural fats. Now your body does rebuild that and make that itself, but it does need, there's something called essential fatty acids or essential fats and non-essential fats. Essential fats are fats we need because our brain needs it to actually build structural fats. And I gave you a little clue to the next podcast episode, right? Omega-3s, phospholipids, we need those to build structural fats. So the point of this podcast today is fats are not all the same. Your brain doesn't need more storage fat. It can't even utilize it, right? Stop eating, like there's the carnivore diet, the keto diet. It ain't helping your brain, guys. It may temporarily be helping you lose weight. It may temporarily help you with your cholesterol problems, temporarily. Long term, it's hurting your cholesterol problems. It is going to clog, because remember, I just said, all these diet, the carnivore diet, paleo diet, Atkins diet, you eat a lot of, now the paleo diet is more about lean animal protein, right? Which is good. But when you start getting into the cheese, the dairy products, right? Those animal protein, those animal fats, those are all animal fats.
all animal fats are terrible for you. Let me repeat that. All animal fats are terrible for you. All they do is add to your midsection. They make your belly fat. That's it. They do not help your brain, your cells, your arteries at all. And if they make your belly, so all the fats that you eat that make your belly grow bigger, those clog your arteries. Those are sticky fats. They are the ones that cause heart disease, give you a stroke, give you plaque, atherosclerosis. They harden your arteries, arterial sclerosis, all these diagnoses, cardiovascular diseases. Stop eating storage fat. So back then they were correct, even though the sugar industry paid for it, but eating a low-fat diet is actually healthy for you. But you also need to eat a low-carb diet too. Let me rephrase that before someone starts to misquote me. When I say low carb, I'm talking about processed sugar carbs. I'm not talking about vegetable carbs. You need to eat a high-carb diet. So the sugar industry back then, they were correct. They just didn't give the complete information. Low-fat diet means what? It means low in storage fat. You need a low storage. They should have added these details. They left out these details and they just kind of general thing. All fats are terrible. No, not all fats are terrible. You still need fats. And I'm not saying you don't need fats. I'm saying you need structural fat. You need a low storage fat diet and a high complex carb diet. You need a high complex carb diet, low storage fat diet, high complex carb diet. I'm not done yet. In this is a high, not even high, a structural fat diet and a low simple carb diet. These are all the same things. That is the ideal diet. Now, what research is that based off of? That's based off people who are living today. Communities, not 1 or 2 people, not 50 people, not 10 people. Because I know people are gonna say, oh, I know my Uncle Sam, he's been smoking all the time and he's eating steaks and meat and potatoes his whole life, smokes a cigar, and he's above 100 years old and he's still on the farm. There are exceptions, guys. Genetics does play a factor. There are exceptions. But how many people, how many hundreds of people, how many thousands of people, actually, not even talking about thousands, can you find hundreds of communities, hundreds of people in one community eating that type of diet, right? Eating a carnivore diet and living past 100 in a high quality life. Please, if you can find one, let me know. I have yet to find one. All the communities that have thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people living a longer life and a higher quality of life, they eat one way. A similar way. And it's not based on all these recent diet fads. The keto diet is a fad. Atkins diet was a fad, right? What I mean by fad is they don't produce sustainable long-term results, high quality results without damaging something else, right? Okay, I'll continue with this fat because I'm going to go into what exactly structural fats should I eat and what should, storage fats. I know I shouldn't be eating animal fats. No, from even like the marbled, steaks, the fat, terrible for you. Dairy, terrible for you. Cheese, terrible for you. What can I eat storage fat? Well, if I want to have storage fat, right? Ice cream, terrible for you. Sugar, terrible for you. All those, And what are structural fat? I need more structural fat. My brain, my family members, my parents are having Alzheimer's, dementia. How can I help them rebuild their brain? You need structural fat. I'm going to get into that to the next podcast. All right, guys. As always, if you have questions, feel free to put in this chat. And I look forward to talking about what should we be eating for structural fats in the next podcast. All right. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel, Sundays, Central Standard Time, 8:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. Coming to you, Restorative Longevity. Jimmy, the Acu Sensei. See you next Sunday.